Jesus answered and said to him, Blessed are you, Shimon Bar Yonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Two phrases I want to get out of this passage, and those are the gates of hell, or the gates of Hades, and I will build my church. Jesus being the builder of the church. Now let's talk about the gates of hell. In the margin of my Bible, or down in the footnotes there, in the commentary, it says the expression gates of Hades means the power of death cannot prevent the advance of the kingdom, and that may very well be a proper interpretation. But I want to get at it another way this morning in thinking about this, the gates of Hades. When the scripture sometimes talk about hell or Hades, sometimes they are talking about the forces of of evil. The forces that comprise of the world, the flesh, and the devil, and the demons. And so when it talks about the forces of hell, or hell did this, it's talking about that aspect of wickedness or evil. And I want to come at it from that standpoint this morning. And so if Hades then represents the evil side, then what are those gates? Well, when we think of gates, possibly we think of something different than what they thought of in that day. In that day, the major cities of the world were walled, thick walls for defense. And those walls were basically impenetrable. You had to go through the gates. And so as long as you were a friend, the gates were open to you and you could go and come. But if they were under attack or an enemy came into the area, they would close those gates, and you did not get into the city then unless those gates were open to you. And we understand that imagery, and that will fit what we want to talk about this morning. But when I think of gates, when I was a kid, we grew up out in the country, and at the time, I used to say this, it seemed like we were so far out in the country, so far back in the sticks that they had to pipe daylight to us, but it wasn't really quite that far. In today's standards, it wasn't far at all. But we lived out in the country, and we as kids, there were more kids than there were doors or window seats. And so when we were going to go somewhere, and Mom's taking us out to get in the car, whoever said shotgun first got to sit by the door. Okay? I don't know why shotgun means sit by the door, but that was the envied seat. That was the place where you wanted to be. So we'd come piling out of the house toward the car. It was shotgun. Now, that's in the car. If we were going in the pickup, then there was only one window. All right, or one window seat, one passenger side. And so whoever said shotgun got to sit over there. And so it was the place you wanted to be, except for one thing. Living in the country, in particularly our case, we lived where there were cattle. And that was my father's job, was to take care of the cattle. And there were pastures strewn all over the property out there. And so they were fenced in, and they had gates. And so, I don't know, there seemed to be a rule that the driver drove up, but whoever was sitting in the shotgun side got out, opened the gate, the driver drove through, the gate was shut, and then you got back in. Now, I say that, but later when I learned to drive, or my dad let me drive, I still had to get out and open up the gates. But you learn early on, it is hammered into you that you close the gates. You don't just drive through, go do your business, and come out. And why is that? Because the cows would get out. I don't know, they have this sense. If there is an open gate, they will find it. And they will go out it. And then you've got cattle strewn all over the place, and then it's hard to get them back. And it's easy for them to get out. It's natural. They love to get out. But when you start herding them back and trying to get them to go back through that gate, it's like there's an invisible force field or something, and they'll bunch up around there and they won't go in. Anyway, I'm telling you cattle stories, but so when I think of gates, I think of that. I'm thinking of later, when I was grown, at least physically grown up, maybe not matured, but I was in college, and 1 year I worked on a sheep farm. And I was, most of the time, the only employee out there taking care of these several hundred sheep. The boss would come around, drive up in his big car, crack the window, and tell me what to do, and then he'd go back to town. And so I spent my days out there when I wasn't going to school working with those sheep. Well, a period of time, there was a young guy that came out there to work with us. His name was Marley. Marley ended up going on and becoming a jockey, actually. So he's supposed to know something about horses. Supposed to. I think it was him. But one Saturday, we were at the end of the day. We had been working out there all Saturday. We were ready to go. It was Saturday night. We were going to do our thing. Raymond would show up, the boss. He'd pay us off, write us a check, figure up our hours, write us a check, and then we'd go out and do what we were going to do that night. So Marley and I were ready to go. Boy, we had worked hard. One of us, and I think it was Marley, I cannot imagine me doing it, but left the gate open. So we're working out there. Here comes Raymond driving up in his big car, and not all of them, but a good little flock of his sheep are out. And he's driving through them to get to us, to find us, and it did not make him happy. In fact, he used to tipple a lot, and so he got real hot. He was angry, and to top it off is even worse. He had a neighbor's horse out in that particular pasture, and that horse had gotten loose. And so he was running around out there, and so he came and he found us. He chewed us out royally. Get them back in. So we're ready to go. So we're both hacked. He thinks I've left the gate open. I think he's left the gate open. We're mad. We're trying to get those sheep in, and the sheep weren't too bad. We're used to dealing with them when we got them back in the pasture. But that horse, we would get him up to the gate, and he'd act like he was going to go through, and he would come up to the gate, and he'd take off. He'd run off there about 50 yards and smirk at us. Have you ever seen a horse smirk? Well, this one did. And so we have to circle back around, and Raymond is out there hollering at us to get that horse in. We're yelling at each other. We're yelling at the horse, trying to get him to come back in. He'd come up to the gate, and then he'd go off out this way. It's Saturday night. And to top it all off, I mean, it was a bad scene, but to top it all off, a norther came in, and it had been, kind of nice in the 50s. We had on short sleeves. We'd been working. It was right comfortable for physical work. But I tell you, in the 5 minutes we were out there running, the temperature must have dropped 20 degrees, and the wind was blowing out of the north. You know how it'll do in West Texas. It got cold. I mean, we were out there freezing, and he had no mercy. You get that horse in. And so when I think of gates, I remember episodes like that. We set ourselves in authority over those gates to deny or allow access to what we want. And it was the same in this culture with the cities. The gates were there to either deny access or to allow it. Now, the gates of hell, let me just suggest that in localities, there has been something that, by localities I mean a region, an area, maybe a city or a geographical location, where the people acting on their impulses of fallenness, their impulses of the flesh, have committed certain kinds of sins that, although God has given dominion of the earth over to man, Adam blew it, and then man has subsequently blown it all through the ages. And as men have gone out from Babel after the fall, have gone out and settled over the whole earth, as they have congregated in places, they've gotten involved in certain kinds of wickedness, iniquity, idolatry, things that open the door, as it were, to hell. They've opened the gates of Hades to the demons to come in and rule in that area. And so that is why you can go to certain places and you see that there are certain kinds of wickedness that are prevalent in that area. We've talked about this before, but when I say San Francisco, what do you think of? Homosexuality is a real stronghold there. It is sinful. There are other areas that are involved and steeped in the occult. And so that certain mindsets and patterns of thinking crop up in the area, and even people that are not involved in the particular iniquity or sin of the area are accepting of it and yield and make place for it in their philosophy of life or in their mindsets where they expect it and accept it, and it's the norm of the area. And I suggest that in many places, there are just places around the world that are given over to certain kinds of evil, and it is prevalent there. Other places, like here, are not so overtly evil, and yet each place has its particular problems. The gates of hell. So when I see this, and it's talking about the gates of hell, that is what I'm thinking about. Particular reasons why demon spirits and a mindset exist and can almost function unchallenged because they have been welcomed there in some generation to be allowed to function there without check. All right? Can you see that? In every region then there will be a quote-unquote prophetic voice. By that I mean demonic kind of revelation or a message given by that particular evil. All right? In America, that's a big region, but do you know, why do people flock to America from other countries? It's for the American dream, isn't it? I mean, will you give me that? People from other cultures want to come to America because they see opportunity. And this is not a bad thing. But if America is good, one of the things that we are very good at it is making money, providing opportunities, and prosperity flows. You live better than the kings of all the ages. You're just a middle-class American, just. But in our point in history, you live personally better than many of the most wealthy kings throughout history. Do you understand that? So wealth is a relative kind of thing. To us, we just take it as our due. Well, people see that and want to come. But I'll tell you that part of the problem with that, although it in itself is not a bad thing, there can come into rulership the flaw of it or the wickedness of it, and we could call that, and the Bible calls it, mammon. I got an interesting perspective on the way that we see things when we had dinner with Ian Andrews. You remember a couple of years ago, he's a man that moves tremendously, anointedly in healing. And we went out to dinner with him, and he was talking, and Jimmy and Brenda were with us, and we got to talking about it, and we got a Britisher's point of view on our culture. And I don't remember exactly what he was talking about, but he said, well, yeah, and the Americans, you know, they want to sell it. And I saw what he was saying from the Britisher's perspective. You know, Americans, if we have anything, we're going to make money out of it some way. We are just oriented that way. And so if you give over to that fully, then mammon can become extremely greedy, and is even infiltrated into the doctrines of the church, where we preach greed sometimes instead of generosity. Say, well, the voice that God raises up against that voice of greed then is generosity. And so we preach giving, and people, it ruffles them. I mean, if you want to stir, I know you guys are used to it, but if you want to stir people up, go into a strange place and begin to talk about tithing and that it is a requirement of God and that you are to give, and that is part of your duty of walking. Now, you guys, You have settled in, make it a lifestyle, and you are blessed because of it. But I tell you, there's a lot of resistance to that teaching. Why is that? Because Mammon has a strong hold in this arena, in America, and our mindset is greed. Well, think about it. We have an orientation that way in America. Now, I am not saying that we overthrow the system and change it, because we are a blessing to the world, but we just have to be careful that we don't slip over into Mammon. Now, there are many other national sins that we have, like abortion, porn, sexual promiscuity, sexual perversion. I mean, you could make a long list with me. These are areas in America that need to be changed, and we have become more and more accepting of its legitimacy to exist than we have in generations in the past. We are just spiraling down. And I know that you know this, but it's just good to confront it and talk about it sometimes. In our area, racism is a stronghold that we have to fight against. And we buy into the national sins, but particularly we are so independent of one another. And in the church, we are spiritually complacent in our area. This is something that we struggle against continually. C.S. Lewis said this: "There is no neutral ground in the universe. Every square inch, every split second is claimed by God and counterclaimed by Satan." This is the gates of Hades side. All right, now let's look at the other side a little bit. I will build my church. He sets the church, I'm talking about the church at large, in these localities where there is rampant evil and certain expressions of wickedness, in order to carry out his purposes and to confront and raise up a voice and a change of mind, or a renewing of the mind, against the evil of the area, however it's expressed. And the devil and the demons that are entrenched there fight it tooth and nail all the way. And so the church is engaged in a war. Now, I say that, and this is my experience, is that given American life and the busyness and even good things like raising your kids and earning a living, the things that you should be engaged in, they become so all-engrossing that it's like any evil that exists in the locality, then the church is kind of set back in a defensive posture against the expression of evil in the locality. And so our believing God and our mindset of the way this war should be is a defensive posture. God protect me, God bless me, God, I will give, help me in my business, help me to witness to the guys around me, but it is all defensive, and most of the church that occurs within the walls. Am I right in this? This is the way you think. This is the way I think. And I believe God is bringing us, or is taking us through a change of thought. It may take a generation to do it. I hope not, but I believe that He is trying to get us to change the way that we think about this war. Now, I believe that most people it doesn't even occur to most of us that we are in a war. And so when we take hits, yes, we believe it's the devil whacking us, but it's not because we're out there necessarily trying to do something. It's because we just happen to be here in the prevailing evil of the area. And yes, we're going to get tagged by it occasionally, but I'll keep up my defensive posture, keep that hedge of protection around me, and that's my responsibility. But I believe that He is saying in this passage, proper understanding is not that hell will not prevail against the gates of the church. You follow what I'm saying? It's not saying that. It is not saying that hell will not prevail against the gates of the church. It is saying that these gates of hell, these openings to the demons, the demonic hordes in an area, will not stand because of the outgoing, outreaching ministry of the church. And that is totally different paradigm than the way we think. And it has to be changed. Or we'll just continue in the way that we are. Will we not? Do you know I taught this lesson the first time I ever came here? I have known it mentally for years. Was that 12 years, 13 years ago? And yet, to make it experiential is a whole different kettle of fish. And so I thought I would stir up you this morning that way, just so we've got to start to think, no, we're not in a defensive posture. We are supposed to be drawing out our sword. We are not in trenches waiting for them to attack us. We're supposed to be climbing out with the sword of the Spirit and all the other armor and going after these gates of hell. Because if we don't, generation after generation after generation of the cities will just remain the way they are. Once we're all gone, the church will continue to exist. It'll be our kids or the other ones that come up. But those same demons that are stirring up, planting the mindsets in this area will just continue on and continue on. Some generation has to lay hold of this and say, well, I'm not going to take it anymore. And it can't be one person. It has to be the church rise up and say, I am not going to take this anymore. I don't have to. I see what Jesus said. He's building the church. He gives the weapons so we can line up with Him and take His purposes, take His mission, and go into this city. See, every city has a redemptive purpose, a reason for existence in the mind of God. And it is a good thing. But at the same time, like C.S. Lewis said, every square inch here will be resisted by the devil. Now, you think, well, he's talking about souls. Well, yes, I am. But the kingdom of God is more than just individuals. Individuals important to God? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Bought with a horribly expensive price. The torture of Jesus Himself bought individuals for the kingdom of God. And so, yes, that is part of it. But do you know, I don't believe that there's neutral ground. For instance, property. This property belongs to Jesus because we have purchased it and consecrated it to the kingdom. And so these grounds all around here, this building, all of this stuff belongs to the Lord. When this generation passes, we're trusting that it'll stay in the kingdom, that it'll remain a church or remain in the hands of the church, some aspect. Even if we went across town and bought some other kind of thing, the Lord let us, we would still want this to remain in the kingdom. Well, every property that the church owns then, if they give it over to God, then they have taken it away from unbelievers, either who are apathetic to the things of God or who are opposed to the things of God. Influence, politics, business, education, all of these areas the church needs to be involved in, taking ground from the prevailing evil that exists in an area. Now I'm talking about the church at large. But see, that is our mission. That's what we ought to be about. Not the defensive, well, I'll plead the blood of Jesus around this property. We ought to be doing that, but also we need to lift our sights up and say, what else can we redeem in this city? What else can we redeem? Lord, where's the opportunity here now? Where's that open door? What can we take back into your kingdom? What can we redeem for you out of the hand of the enemy? And what people can we bring in? This is good preaching to you. And so the devil resists it. So the church in Lynchburg is engaged in a war over this territory. And that means you are a part of it. You may not realize that you are in a war because you get caught up in your daily lives. And I realize that. And you're taking the Lord. Many of you take the Lord into your daily lives, which is a good thing. I'm just challenging you to look up beyond just what you're doing and look for expansion. Look for opportunities that He can use you to redeem something back into His hand. To thump the devil on the noggin. So, at the conference, I heard a fellow speak, and I don't remember who this was, Larry, but you remember somebody saying, they asked Jack Hayford, how come, God gives big churches like yours? And he's retired now, but he had a huge one out in California. And he said something to this effect, and I'm quoting a guy who's quoting him, all right, but he said he raises up big churches because he wants to give voice to the nation. He wants to raise up a message or a word that area can hear. In our town, we have a large mega church. What is it? Thomas Road Baptist Church. Now, there is a lot of resentment and envy of that church and that ministry, but not from me. I believe God has raised them up on purpose. And He has given them a voice and a platform to send a message. And their message is somewhat to our area, but it is not just for us. He has given him a national message.